Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a super fast-paced look at the fundamental rules of biology. We're going to decode the absolute essence of existence and answer a question that honestly seems really simple at first glance, but is actually incredibly complex. What exactly separates the living from the non-living? Let's get into it. So take a second and just look around you right now. You might see a dog sleeping on the rug, maybe a rock sitting in a potted plant, or hey, even the smartphone you use every single day. All these things exist in your world, right? But what actually makes something biologically alive? Well, we're going to solve this little everyday mystery together, and we're going to use a very strict, unyielding scientific checklist to do it. Okay, let's dive into this. What we have is the ultimate, absolutely non-negotiable checklist of life processes. For literally anything to be considered biologically alive, and we're talking anything from a microscopic bacteria all the way up to a massive blue whale, it has to pass this entire test stringently. It needs to be made of cells, it has to perform metabolism and cellular respiration to get energy, it has to grow from within, reproduce, actively respond to its environment, and eventually, it must have a definite lifespan, meaning it will one day die. Now, the absolute foundational building block of that checklist is the cell, and specifically what's inside of it. Let's look at this definition of protoplasm. It's the colorless material that makes up the living part of a cell. And guys, this forms the absolute baseline for life to exist. If an object doesn't have cells filled with this exact protoplasm, there can be absolutely no metabolic activities. Period. And without metabolism, the ability to convert food or sunlight into energy, that object is just fundamentally non-living. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between our two categories. Living things actively grow internally, and they perform complex metabolic reactions just to survive. Non-living things, on the other hand, well, they have zero cellular structure, no metabolism, and practically speaking, they're kind of immortal. They don't have a natural life cycle. They're just created, and eventually they're destroyed or broken apart by completely external forces, like the weather or human activity. Section 1. The Great Sorting Game. Put your world to the test. So with those rules locked in our minds, let's play a really quick, high-energy mental sorting game. Here's your first challenge. I want you to think about a cloud drifting across the sky, a fire roaring in a fireplace, or maybe a high-tech robot walking around. Are they living things? Take a second to mentally guess. A cloud definitely moves, a fire consumes fuel and literally grows, and a robot uses energy and responds to its environment, right? Okay, did you make your guess? Well, if you said non-living, you hit the nail on the head. They all completely fail our biological test. Even though a fire burns fuel and a robot can move, they totally lack the fundamental cellular structure, the DNA, and those internal metabolic life processes that are required to be categorized as living. Any movement you see from them is simply due to external forces, like the wind pushing the cloud or just artificial mechanics. All right, let's throw another curveball your way. What about a rolling snowball getting larger and larger as it goes down a hill, or a clump of clay being mashed together? How about an icicle growing longer in the freezing winter cold? They're visually increasing in size and mass right before our very eyes. So do they pass the biological growth test? Actually, they do not. And the reason why is a really fascinating concept called accretion. Non-living things grow only by the gradual accumulation of additional external layers. So it's just mashing more clay onto the outside or water freezing onto the surface of that icicle. This is entirely different from living things, which actually grow from within through very complex cellular division and maturation. So the crucial point here is how these things handle changes in their environment. Think about it. An icicle has zero internal defense. If the sun comes out, it's completely at the mercy of the temperature and just melts. But living things maintain something called homeostasis. This is that incredible ability to adapt and maintain stable internal conditions. Like, for example, people living in the freezing Arctic actively produce internal body heat to keep their cells alive and well, no matter how extreme it gets outside. Let's move to section 2, tricky exceptions. Blurring the lines of life. Now, we're going to tackle some of the absolute weirdest curveballs in biology that often confuse even the experts, blurring those neat lines of our scientific classification system. Read this really fascinating excerpt with me. A dead animal or plant is considered a living thing even though it is not alive. Okay, I know, it sounds like a total paradox, right? But in biology, a fallen dead tree in a forest, which is often called a nurse log, is actually still classified in the living category. Why? Because it once possessed cellular life. It once grew and respired, and even in death, all that organic matter provides absolutely vital nutrients for new living things to grow right on top of it. Now, what's really interesting here is the virus. Viruses are basically the ultimate rule breakers of biology. They hover right on the borderline of our classification system. See, if a virus is just sitting on a table outside a host, it's completely inactive and considered non-living. It has no metabolism of its own whatsoever. But the very second it gets inside a host cell, it suddenly acts exactly like a living organism. It starts utilizing DNA and reproducing rapidly. It's a true biological shapeshifter. Okay, here is one more categorization challenge for you. Think about water. It covers most of our planet, it makes up a huge percentage of your own body, and it's arguably the single most essential element for survival on Earth. But is water a living thing? The answer is firmly no. Water is completely non-living, or what scientists call abiotic. It has no cells, it definitely doesn't reproduce, and it has absolutely no metabolism. But here's the catch. Despite being fundamentally non-living, it's an absolutely vital resource that every single living organism on this planet heavily depends on just to survive. Which leads us perfectly into section 3, the big picture, bringing ecosystems together. So we've spent this explainer basically separating our world into two distinct boxes. But the reality is, in nature, they don't exist in isolation at all. Check out this side-by-side comparison of how they interact and rely on each other out in the wild. On the left, we've got our living, biotic factors, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria. And on the right, our non-living, abiotic factors, sunlight, temperature, soil, water. A successful ecosystem is literally a perfect continuous marriage of these two categories. Biotic organisms entirely rely on abiotic factors. A plant literally cannot photosynthesize and sustain the entire food web without the non-living sunlight beaming down on it, and the non-living soil it pulls its nutrients from. And that incredible interconnectedness brings us to one of the most profound mysteries in all of science. Just think about this for a second. If every living thing is made of cells, and if you zoom in close enough, those cells are just made of completely non-living atoms, at what exact moment does non-living matter spark into life? It's a fascinating, mysterious bridge between the non-living universe and the living beings that we are. I highly encourage you to keep exploring that incredible question. Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.